So while I was away on holiday, I was posting shorts from this new track that I'm working on, and I got a question on how to make drops like this. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, as you can probably already tell, the main stuff is happening here in the sequences. You can see a whole bunch of different clips being chopped up. And here you can see the main group that is responsible for that. And you can see there's quite a bit of effects happening on top of there as well. But even if I turn those effects off, what you'll find is that this group is sounding very, very complex. And that's because, of course, all of the sound design is done in the individual clips. And these are just the chopped up versions of very long recordings, which I can show you by extending this over here. You can see very long recordings of these individual synths. This is an FM synth that I made before. This was actually the original idea for the track before I started working on this complex setup here. But then we have some other files too. Let me just quickly get those towards the end here. And again, these are files with individual segments of sound design. And in order to make these, I did a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And as you can see, then we do a little bit of this, that. And then finally, we just take all of these things and turn it into this. Gonna edit the footage of the original stream where I'm doing this on top of this. But if you just want to go and look at this stream, you can do so, of course, with the link in the description. And while you're there, make sure that you're liking the video, that you're subscribed with notifications on, and also that you leave an interesting comment if you have one. Maybe something that you want me to cover next in this project. So once you have these kind of files, it's just a matter of chopping it up and making sure that there's only one sound ever playing at the time. So you can just see scrolling through this that there's only ever one sound playing, and I'm constantly changing the rhythm. I'm constantly kind of randomizing different ideas. But there's sometimes also a little bit of repetition because you want to create a little bit of familiarity in here, a little bit of groove in here, but it should be kind of like a constantly changing groove. If you can hear the individual like segments, you would say maybe like every 2 bars there's a new kind of main rhythm developing just because of the placement of the individual elements. And of course, once you have that, you need the individual effects on top of that, which as you can see is quite a lot. Mainly what we're doing here in the beginning is just gluing everything together with some strong compression and removing any of the low frequencies that may be in here, left from the sound design or from this heavy compression of the low frequencies. That is the reason why after an OTT, I always tend to cut the low frequencies on stuff that I don't want them, because the OTT can really bring them back in an aggressive way. Then we have dimension expander and chorus for a little bit of stereo width on all of these elements. And already we have something that sounds a lot more glued together. We're then going to add a saturator to really glue it together even more. As you can see, all of it is driven with 5 dB in here. And we have the soft clipper turned on so that it clips nicely at 0. Really just making everything a little bit louder actually. And then we get to our first rack. Now this is really an effect here. As you can see, there's some automations going on in here. And as you can see, sometimes I've opted just to pitch shift it down. Mainly towards the end here, there's this one bar which is completely pitch shifted down, but there's also some other moments in here. That is again just helping, emphasizing different parts of the groove and slightly changing up the rhythm. This M transformer here is part of the initial effects that is bringing the sound in, but it's also including a little bit of a nice stretch effect here. And then one way to keep a little bit of consistency in there is to have a little bit of a looping effect on top of it. And that is what we're doing with this reverb over here, which as you can see towards the end of every bar is just kind of turning up. And this is drowning specifically the last offbeat of the bar into quite a lot of reverb, which is how you notice that something is changing there. And this is a very easy way to keep track of the rhythm, because one of the things that you want to avoid with these kind of drops is to create a rhythm that isn't really danceable. And what I mean by that, first of all, as you can see with a lot of these chops, I'm chopping them up in 1/8 notes or quarter notes. I have the occasional 16 note in here, I believe, somewhere. But as you can see, it's mainly just 8 notes and quarter notes and even longer segments. And then even within the individual segments, as you can see, even if there's multiple notes, they're all playing 16 notes here, 16 notes here. And that is going to be true for every file, because what I want to do is I want to keep it in line with the rhythm that we're setting up with our bass line, which is of course just the standard rolling bass line, so 16 notes. And yes, here you can also see some variations. So we have a variation over here on the bass, we have a variation over here. We have this lower key over here, and that then goes up to a higher key, which is also variation, because here I've chopped out the last note of the MIDI. And then we have a little fill over here. This is, I believe, a kick fill. And then finally, we have another variation at the 12th bar, and then the big fill towards the end here. And this is again reinforcing the rhythm and the groove into the track. So structure-wise, we're not doing something too complex over 16 bars, but there are enough variations that every segment is its own distinct part. So you could say that we have a segment over here, a segment over here, a segment over here, a segment over here, and then the segment over here. This last part is where the kick and bass is also filtering up. So you can see that in the waveform over here. And as I said before, there's some other things, mainly this pitch shifter, which is turned down for an entire bar over here, which is making it so that this part is a segment and then this part is a segment. So really, when it comes down to it, what you can see is that there's this really chaotic element at the center of this, in the fact that we're just doing random sound design for, say, 6 different files, and then we're chopping that up and putting it into place. Of course, it's always going to sound the same because now it is in audio. And that is one of the cool things about this, is that you have this consistency in working this way. Because you're going to know exactly what is going to happen, you can also adapt the structure of the track really well to the sounds that you have in the track. Now from here, there's a few more elements. We have an telephoto over here, which is just doing a little bit of chopping on the kick drum. As you can see, I'm not really going for the actual sidechaining effect here, as I'm not really sidechaining to the kick, just making sure that there's nothing playing on the transient. Now, one of the other things that I've done is I've gone through here and I've added fades to almost all of these clips. There's like very short fades everywhere to make sure that there's no extra clicks happening and that there's no extra stuff kind of interfering with transients and maybe with the drums and whatnot. And because of the compressor, even the smallest click is going to be able to cause a problem here, because of course it's going to be massively boosted by this OTT. Now finally, we have the transition into the next segment, which is going to happen with this reverb as well as this delay, which is really responsible for what is happening on the end here. As you can see, what we have here is we have a little bit of a pattern with the dry wet of the reverb, and this is also used to smooth out that kind of stretching effect that I showed before. We're also doing something interesting with the reverb type here, in that we're kind of switching between algorithms. And then over here, we're doing a little bit of an offbeat pattern, which is getting stronger over time, and that is then used by the delay to actually ring out over time as well. And to keep that delay tail a little bit more interesting, we have a final chorus over here, which is just going to turn up in dry wet. So if we look at this, it is just going to turn up over time. And that is really what smooths out the tail and gives more focus towards the other elements which are coming in this part. So that means that our transition now sounds like this. And that is how you make those kind of complex, glitchy sounding drops. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you want more of this stuff, please let me know by leaving a like and making sure that you're subscribed. Another way to support me is to do so financially by checking out my products or my Patreon page, which you can find both in the description. So thanks if you do that. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.